as the monarch butterfly flutters through the milkweed in the garden. I am thankful for the efforts of my friends and of so many people from Mexico to Canada who are stepping forward to provide sanctuary for these amazing wanderers. Because their life cycle spans a continent, the healthy presence of monarch butterflies gives hope that we can restore the health of our own life support system for our children and the children yet to be born in the 21st century. Dr. DeMarco's words give us inspiration for how we can work in very local and specific ways in conjunction with others across the globe to foster a healthy environment and sustain what she calls a living earth. Patricia DeMarco, a Pittsburgh native, received her doctorate in biology from the University of Pittsburgh. She spent a 30-year career in energy and environmental policy, including as the demand-side manager for the Connecticut Municipal Electric Energy Cooperative and as a commissioner for the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. She was executive director of the Rachel Carson Homestead Association and director of the Rachel Carson Institute at Chatham University. She was elected in 2016 as a member of the Forest Hills Borough Council. She is the author of Pathways to Our Sustainable Future, a Global Perspective from Pittsburgh, and teaches ethics and public policy at Chatham University. She received the 2018 Visionary of the Year Award from Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light, and is the 2019 Carnegie Science Environment Award recipient. So from her vantage point of Pittsburgh, connected with the entire globe, her talk today will offer us possibilities for protecting the rights of the living earth. Welcome, Dr. DeMarco.
Hello, everybody. I have a question for you. How many of you like to sing? Good. Hold that thought. I am really looking forward to talking to you as soon as I figure out how to change this, about our living earth, about the beautiful planet that we call home. And I wanted to reflect that 50 years ago, this year, we first stepped on the surface of the moon. And this was a tremendous achievement, but one of the most amazing things that came from that feat was the view from space of our fragile planet and how really unique we are. This is something that changed our way of seeing our world from that point forward. And I attribute a great deal of the changes that happened in the 1970s to that changed perception of the fragility and vulnerability of our world. We have a planet that gives us a life support system fueled by the power of the sun, solar power. These are the things that we need that are priceless, without which we would not survive, and neither would anything else on the earth. Clean water, fresh air, fertile ground, and the biodiversity of species, of which we are just one part. That great interconnected web of life that has evolved together over millions of years is really codependent and interdependent based on these basic support systems. And the ecosystem services are the gifts of our living earth. These are the things that we take for granted, but without which there would be no life. Food production, water, wood, fiber, fuel, nutrient cycling, which happens all by itself, soil formation. You could not do those things deliberately as human inventions without a great deal of trying and effort and failure. We just don't think about it. Photosynthesis, where plants, especially trees, connect the mineral resources of the land with the air, nitrogen, oxygen, and create starches and sugars that we use for food. These services are what make life possible and are, in fact, the critical component of life on Earth. And our life support system is in crisis. From burning fossil fuels, from extracting resources, from population growing, and also with hyperconsumption and the increasing expectations of hyperconsumption around the world. These are causing a tremendous amount of stress that have been manifest as the existential crises of our time. And I would say that we know climate change, and you've heard a lot about that today, but also global pollution, which is now being manifest in places where people don't even live, such as the islands where the albatross chicks emerge. There are very few people living there, and yet that is a place where the animals who live on the sea have become so infused with plastic that their chicks do not survive. The laws of nature are not negotiable. We need to solve the climate crisis, but it is not a technology problem. Aurora has just given you a whole list of things that we can do that are technology solutions and that actually work. And we're here in Pittsburgh where we have a center of innovation. We have all kinds of examples all around us of the technologies that actually will be better solutions. Our only problem is a moral and an ethical problem. Do we leave a living planet to our children or not? And the concept of sustainability, I think, we can argue about it. You have academic discussions about what it is and what it isn't. But sustainability describes a way of living that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This is my granddaughter, Leah, at the age of 10. She made her first loaf of bread on her birthday, and she called me up. She was all excited. Mimi, Mimi, I made a loaf of bread all by myself, and it took me all afternoon, and the boys ate it in 15 minutes. Okay, but I would like her grandchildren to have the experience of being able to harvest grain, have them make their own bread and feed their families, to feel the satisfaction of being able to survive in ease without having to worry about where things come from, and have the earth still viable and living to provide that wherewithal to my next generation. This is an existential challenge for the whole planet. It's a global imperative, and it's an intergenerational imperative. If sustainability conditions are our goal, our current situation is one where economic priorities far outmeasure other measures of value. Our environment, our society values are much diminished in the decision-making of our corporations and our governments particularly. If we are to achieve a sustainable situation, we have to rebalance those things that make us human. We don't really feel better from having more stuff. That's what drives the economy. We feel better when we feel a sense of purpose, when we feel respected, when we feel dignity, when we feel the satisfaction of being in a community of caring people. The things that make us human are often priceless, and they're not counted in the gross domestic product at all. The laws of nature and the rights of nature are things that are concepts that go beyond individual economic entities. The earth is a living system. We don't own it. We cannot own it, but we depend on it. For example, the Amazon provides 50% of the free oxygen in our atmosphere. The other 50% mostly comes from the 18 inches of the top of the ocean, which contains phytoplankton. Without those things, our air would not be viable for us to breathe. And we cannot own those things. We cannot buy them and sell them. We give no value to them. The rights of the living earth have become a centerpiece of the discussion around climate change. In 2010, there was a gathering of the indigenous peoples of the world in Cochabamba, Bolivia. And they developed a declaration, the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, which were really very, very compelling and came to the Paris discussions in 2015 and were used to drive the demand from 2% goal down to 1.5 degree goal, from a 2 degrees Celsius change from the Industrial Revolution to a 1.5 degree change, because they argued that even at 1.5 degrees change, countries of the indigenous peoples would be so badly affected that their quality of life would be seriously compromised. And so I took out some of the little pieces of their preamble, which was very moving, and I urge you to read it if you ever get a chance. But they're saying that we have a common destiny. We, the people who live on this planet, have a common destiny. We do not thrive or survive in isolation, other than all of us being interconnected and all of us thriving and surviving. And recognizing that capitalism and all forms of depredation, exploitation, abuse, and contamination have caused great destruction, degradation, and disruption of Mother Earth, putting life as we know it today at risk. Life as we know it today co-evolved. We did not evolve in isolation. We have a whole system of living things that support us. And I think their insight and knowledge was very helpful. So I'm going to share with you the 10 rights of the living earth. The first, the right to life and to exist. The full diversity of living plants and animals on earth have an intrinsic right to life. Human habitat destruction has really interrupted many species. We've had a report just this last week that the populations of North American songbirds has been reduced by 29% since 1970. And we are driving many species to extinction. Extinction doesn't happen in isolation. Second, the right to be respected. Many people are driven off of their land or driven out of their communities and have had many thousands of years in some cases of experience of living in harmony with nature in their own worlds. And colonial appropriation of land for resource extraction particularly has destroyed entire cultures. And the cultural wisdom of many indigenous peoples holds great value for guiding us into a transformation of our society. I think the sovereignty of indigenous peoples is something that we need to re-examine. I spent 10 years in Alaska, and some of the most valued times I had there were times when I got fogged in or snowed in really outlying areas like St. Mary's. I'll tell you about that sometime. The third thing is that living things have the right to regenerate their biocapacity and to continue their own vital cycles and processes free from human disruption. This is a robin nest that happened to be installed in the window ledge right inside my front door. Now, my neighbor had a similar situation, and they took it away 6 times before the robins moved to my house. Well, I put up a barrier in the walkway, and I didn't let anybody walk in or out my front door until the robins had safely hatched and left. But there is really so many times when we could make room in our life for natural habitat, for natural things, and give them space, and we don't. If you think about, all the lawns there are in America, and you look at those as places that are 3 inches high, green, you mow them all the time whether they need it or not. You have the obligatory single tree, usually under a power line, so the tree gets all disfigured when they cut it around the power line. Those are not places that give habitat. All the private land in this country, if it were devoted to biodiversity maintenance, would make a huge difference. And just respecting the right of living creatures to have their own space. Maintaining identity and integrity as a distinct, self-regulated, and interrelated being. This is a complicated one, but there are so many complex systems in nature, such as coral reefs and wetlands, rainforests, and they are being compromised by human actions, either directly or indirectly. So the Great Barrier Reef of Australia is one where people like Sylvia Earle, who have studied the oceans for years, have wept tears, bitter tears of sadness, because the coral reefs are not going to regenerate from repeated shocks of heat, stress, and also from the increasing acidity of the oceans. We have really been compromising the entire ecosystem integrity of many, many things. And this is something we have to understand. They don't happen in a vacuum. When these kinds of ecosystems collapse, they reverberate throughout whole food chains, whole food webs, whole other systems. The right to water as a source of life. Now this is one that here in Pittsburgh we worry about water. We have stormwater issues. We have all kinds of water management issues. But in some places it's a critical indicator of whether life can exist at all. You've heard some stories and seen images today of countries and places where severe prolonged drought has really destroyed the fabric of communities and has dried the land to beyond the point of bearing any life. But, you know, we have criminalized people who defend the water. The Standing Rock Waterkeepers in 2016, there's a law passed now that if they do this again and stand to prevent pollution of their water, they will be arrested. That's also true in Pennsylvania. If you object to pipelines or object to infrastructure for energy systems because you're concerned about the destruction of your land or your water, you can be considered a felon. We're going the wrong direction, guys. We should be protecting and defending our fresh water because this is the irreplaceable part of our life support system. The right to clean air. Air pollution does not respect boundaries. It doesn't respect state boundaries. It doesn't respect national boundaries. And many parts of our country, pollution has reduced the distance and the clarity of what we can see by 70%. 1 in 4 children in some places have asthma, and that includes our area here, like the Monongahela Valley. And global air emissions contribute significantly to global warming, ocean acidification, as well as particulates. The right to clean air is universal, but the obligation to protect it really has to rest with those who are causing the most of the emissions. We'll get to that in a minute. The right to integral health. This is health connected to your entire well-being, your physical health, psychological health, emotional health, and the social and spiritual health of communities. You do not have healthy beings unless you have a healthy environment. And that goes all the way to our food systems, which we've talked about a good bit today, and also to aligning the way we organize our ways of providing food, shelter, and clothing so that we have a healthy outcome for all the participants in that process. And the right to be free from contamination, pollution, or toxic or radioactive waste. This is one of the most sad tragedies, is that our pollution does not stay where we put it. And because so many of the things that we have ended up putting into our environment as pollutants end up being distributed way beyond. Things don't stay put, right? They travel according to the waves and the tides and the atmosphere, and they get distributed way, way beyond where they can be controlled. You don't think about it, but I don't know, how many of you have been on the road and see somebody throw a whole bag full of trash out their window? How many of you have seen that? Don't tell me any of you have done it, right? But, you know, what do you do when you see that, you know? I mean, other than have steam come out of your ears in rage, right? You know, if it's safe, you go up and get it and pick it up and knock on the window and say, you dropped something, do you want it back? And they look at you like you're crazy. But we have to be conscious that there's no way. When you throw away something that is designed to last 1,000 years as a material, and it has a useful life of 12 minutes, like a plastic fork, this is a decision to deliberately pollute the biosphere. We have to start rethinking these things. And increasing production of the things that make plastics in particular, at a time when we have not dealt with the issue of the back end of the cycle. Where does it go when you're done using it? We need to rethink that. It is a huge issue for our part of the country in particular, and it's a huge issue for the decisions that we're making about sustainable living going forward. The right to not have your genetic structure modified or disrupted in a manner that threatens integrity or vital and healthy functioning. 105 of the commonly used agricultural pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides have endocrine disrupting effects on wildlife. That means they mimic hormones when they get into the natural systems, and they interrupt reproduction, they interrupt the vital functions of those organisms. The Waters of America Act was passed in part to help the vernal pools in agricultural areas that were being contaminated with pesticide, herbicide, and fertilizer runoff. The work of in atrazine is one of the issues. Atrazine is used as a fungicide preventive in corn in particular, and it is a known endocrine disruptor in amphibians like frogs. So this is an area where when you have GMO-based crops like we were talking about earlier today, the effluent of that kind of production has unintended consequences for wildlife and indirectly for people as well. And then the right to full and prompt restoration from violations caused by human activities. This was a huge issue at Cochabamba. There were a lot of people who felt that this was something that deserved to rise to the level of crime against humanity, because there are some kinds of disruptions that are not repairable under any conditions. This picture that I show you is a restored mountaintop following mountaintop removal coal mining in West Virginia. The restoration is preventing the thing from continuing to landslide, but in no way does that replace the forest that was removed. No way does it replace the valley that was filled with the mountaintop when they dumped it into the nearest valley, and it doesn't replace the watershed. So under circumstances like this, maybe the decision is that there are some things that we should not do because recovery isn't possible. So when you look at those kinds of rights, you think about the obligation that we have, and I like to use Rachel Carson as a source of wisdom on these things, and her words underlying all these problems of introducing contamination into our world is the question of moral responsibility. Responsibility not to our own generation, but to those of the future. So if you look at these issues of resource use and development as a precautionary tale, what can you do to prevent harm? And that should be part of the decision-making process. So right now, there are deliberations underway about the Pebble Creek copper and gold mine in Bristol Bay, Alaska. How many of you know about Bristol Bay, Alaska? You know where it is? It is the home of one of the most amazing wild fisheries of salmon in the world. The Bristol Bay area flows into Lake Iliamna and then into the ocean, and the salmon have a 6-year life cycle. So they leave as 1-year-old smolt, and they come back as sockeye. Well, maybe this big. But the thing is, they're highly susceptible to arsenic in the water. And mining gold and copper in the top of the watershed of this particular fishery would not only wipe out the salmon, but also the 180 native communities along that whole watershed who depend on that fishery for their livelihood as subsistence peoples. So this is a huge decision. It's pending. It has not been finalized. Applying the precautionary principle would be something that would make a difference in this area. What can we do to prevent pollution? What can we do to prevent harms rather than try to figure out how to clean it up afterwards? Sometimes remedy is not possible. We also have the issue of intergenerational justice. We have in our area here in Western Pennsylvania and Ohio and West Virginia a legacy of the history of coal mining which is in decline right now. I find that there are a lot of communities who are looking at what do we do? Coal is dying, what comes next? And there's a whole reimagine process going on, largely led by the League of Women Voters, but in some cases by university groups, where they're looking at what are the assets we have of our community? What do we value here? What can we build on for our children that we leave as a legacy for our land, that we can reclaim a livelihood that's supported in our area? And these are the things that come forward from people who are looking at how you leave a better way for your children, for the next generation. And they come up with some amazing plans. I'll talk to you about some of them in a minute, but some of them include going back to farming, especially regenerative agriculture, mixed-use farming in places that have been mined, and using that regenerative agriculture process to restore the land and restore the communities. We've heard a lot of things alluded to today about this graph. This is called the Champagne graph, and it shows you the matter of international injustice, where those who have caused the pollution, for the most part, are the top 10% of the people of the world, and the poorest 50% only produce 10% of the emissions. This is the basic disparity in the distribution of harm and the distribution of causes. And when you put that into a concrete example, you think about something. How many of you eat potato chips or snacks that have palm oil in them? How many of you? Okay, read the label on the back of the things that you eat or use. If it says palm oil on it, a lot of times that will come from the 27 million hectares of rainforest that have been torn down in order to put up palm oil plantations. It is driving things like orangutans and cheetahs nearly to extinction at this point. And the forest destruction in these countries is reaching phenomenal levels because the cash crop drives. They get value for that crop. Nobody pays them. Nobody pays to maintain that rainforest that are the lungs of the earth in the middle of our, year-round green times. So this is another area where we can make choices that have an effect on the overall problem. If you look at things that have a whole supply chain of destruction, do we really need some of these things? Can you live without potato chips? I don't know. And there are also geographic disparities within our own country. Island nations, coastal cities are being submerged by rising seas, but coal mine and oil field towns, the boom is over, and things are going to change. And fertile farmlands that have been experiencing 5-year droughts are becoming deserts. These are things that are not just happening other parts of the world, they're happening here too. And, we had someone say a little earlier today that, well, if it were just, white rich people, then we'd have a different opinion. I don't think so. We've become numb to everything. People don't really care, but we have to start caring because, it's the kind of thing where one of us are all of us, and we're not in this alone. 140 million climate migrants by the year 2050 if we continue on the path that we're on. This is the report of the United Nations on land and climate change that came out, but we're already seeing some of these migrants. In the Syria Kurd refugees in the Turkish border in 2015, that was caused because of a long-term drought where many, many, many people moved into the cities. The cities were not able to cope with the influx of people. The social structure of the society came to shreds and people move. Same thing happening in South America, and now we have criminalized these people at our border. This makes no sense. You have to look at the cause of the problem. These are not criminals. These are our brothers and sisters to the south of our land, and this is our fate. If we don't change, we will also be climate migrants. We have to preserve the right for life to exist. We cannot legislate the laws of chemistry and physics or the biologic system responses to changes in our environment. We have to adjust our laws to be in harmony with nature. We can no longer expect our culture and our civilization to rest on the exploitation and subjugation of nature. That time is over. So really, if you look at some of the laws that we have that need to change, some of them govern the use of land, the mineral rights taking precedence over surface rights, for example. That standard goes back to 1837 when we were trying to jumpstart the Industrial Revolution, and so we made mineral right access a way to help settle Western lands and mine coal and make that productive for people when it was a dangerous, difficult thing to do. And it was considered a public convenience and necessity that you have mineral rights that took precedence over surface rights. Well, if that was the standard, we need to flip it, because we don't need coal and oil and gas as a public convenience or a necessity. Aurora showed you the graphs on the cost curves coming down. And at utility scale, the Lazard curve of cost, life cycle cost assessment for utility scale power production, wind and solar at utility scale are way down at the bottom, much cheaper than anything else. So we don't even have an economic justification. But the cost of ruining our ecosystems, which rest on the surface of the land, these are not counted in the same way, and they're priceless and almost irreplaceable if they're ruined. So what keeps people from moving? These are some pictures I took at the Clean Power Plan demonstrations that happened in Pittsburgh when the EPA Clean Power Plan hearings were going on here. And I went down and stood on the corner with my friend Charlie McAllister, whose picture I'll show you in a minute. And we were talking to some of these guys. Charlie knew most of them because he'd been in the union, and he's calling them out. We had sort of like mini seminar on the corner there. There were 3,400 United Mine Workers and union people, and there were about 400 environmental people with their baby strollers, and they were kind of confined to a corner on the diagonally opposite area. And when you talk to them, their concerns are, what's going to happen to our pensions if there are no coal miners coming into the system? What's going to happen to our health benefits if our company goes bankrupt? What is going to happen to our kids if I can't work? And when you look at the fear, and they saw what happened when Patriot Coal was created to receive the employees of a bankrupt Peabody Coal. And then they went bankrupt, and those people got 10 cents on a dollar for their pensions, and they had no further health benefits. That's a devastating blow to someone who's been in an industry for 5 generations. You cannot throw people away like that. And I'll tell you something else. Pittsburgh went through a crash in the steel industry in the end of the 70s and early 80s. And there was no policy for transitioning those workers into something new. And everybody says, oh, we've got this great renovated technology society here, we're high tech, high meds, all this stuff. That took 30 years. And there are a lot of people who went bankrupt and committed suicide and lost their homes and their families and moved away in that crash of that deindustrialization of our time. That's the wrong way to do a transition, right? It's the wrong way. We need to replace that fear, those scars that still stay today that resist the change. We need to replace it with a plan for a sustainable economy, a workforce that creates decent work and quality jobs and shows people a clear path from where we are to where we need to be. And I can talk for another whole hour on just that topic, and we should do that sometime, but it isn't today. But we're not talking about a transition. We're talking about a transformation. Just the way we need to move our fossil-based civilization to a sustainable civilization. You can think about it like going from a caterpillar whose job it is to eat everything they see in sight and get fat, to a butterfly whose life purpose is to reproduce and be beautiful and eat flowers. And it's a different creature, right? You don't put wings on the caterpillar. The whole resources of the caterpillar pupate and transform themselves into something different. So we're looking at transforming the society we have into something better. And that is where you have pathways to our sustainable future. This is how we get from where we are to where we need to be. We need to look at our energy systems and move them to things that conserve and restore resources rather than destroy them. And one example of that is the Forest Hills Borough Building. This is a net zero energy borough building put up by a community of 5,200 people without raising taxes, on time, under budget. And we got an $880 check last month from the electric company because we actually met the net zero goal. Nobody thought we would do it, but it's comfortable, it's beautiful, and if we had every new building be a net zero building, you wouldn't have everyone go broke. The construction industry would not go belly up. All you would have would be buildings that meet their needs by their own structure. And hopefully you will get enough extra that you can maybe help power each other. We have artificial intelligence experts in this town balancing the loads so that if every building user is also a producer, you can shift it around and back each other up. It's really elegant. They're working on this here. This is not a technology problem. Our energy systems have really beautiful, elegant solutions available. And I can talk about that all day too. Regenerative agriculture, we've spoken about a little bit today, but a non-toxic food system that captures carbon and restores the fertility of the ground. This is our goal, and this is a totally achievable goal. All of the people in this city who at one time had victory gardens sustained most of the population of Pittsburgh through the Second World War. My family had a farm. I'm first generation Italian. My grandparents were farmers in Italy, and so they and all of our neighbors in Mount Washington, we grew almost all the food that we ate, including the illegal chickens under the porch. So agriculture can happen. It has to stop being something that comes at you from somewhere else and become something that we all have a vested interest in preserving. And then preventing pollution through circular economy using materials that are designed to be reused from benign sources. This can go a long way to solving our pollution problem on a worldwide level, so that instead of making plastics from fossil resources that are designed to be thrown away, we make things that are designed to be reused, recycled, repurposed, and use feedstocks that are not toxic to begin with. All of these things will reduce our carbon footprint and will all give us a pathway that provide good jobs, provide healthy people, and improve the health of our planet. And the steps in this kind of a transformation are not things that leap to the eye immediately. If you think about the shift from the days of the horse and buggy to the motorized internal combustion engine, there were a lot of things that happened. They had some crashes between the horses and the cars at first. So we had to pave the roads because horses go around the mud puddles and cars got stuck. They had to have a system of traffic signals. We had to have vehicle licensing, and that helped to pay for the road building. And they had fuel stations replacing horseshoeing operations and tack shops. We haven't done that yet for the renewable energy system. We haven't done that for regenerative agriculture or for the circular economy. We haven't written the rules of the road. We're still trying them out here and there and doing it a little bit in this town, a little bit in that state. If we decided as a uniform objective that we are going to go in the direction that will save our living planet, we would pay attention to lining those rules of the road up to support a sustainable economy and a sustainable society. We can do this. This isn't rocket science. We have a choice of moving from coal and fossil gas to renewable systems, from pesticides, herbicides, and massive amounts of petrochemical-based fertilizers to regenerative agriculture systems. We can go from designing things that are safe instead of trying to tell people what to avoid on their labels. We can protect biodiversity. And this is really important because so many of these are threatened. Our wildlife refuges, our public parks, practices that are seen with instant economic value are really compromising these wild spaces. And we have a choice for the next 10,000 years. These are not things that are going to happen by the invisible hand of the market. We have to decide to drive them in this direction. Corporations are not people. We have to have a plan for transition that protects pensions and benefits, provides meaningful retraining, and reinvests in our communities. People have good ideas about what they want to do instead of the exploitative practices of the past. But we have to find a way to invest in those communities and give those kinds of outcomes a better choice. This is my friend Charlie McCollister. We need a new system of governance that looks at natural resource management as a public trust, not as something to be owned and extracted, that we can prevent the tragedy of the commons on a global scale, where we have a respect for the replacement and regeneration of those resources that we absolutely need, and stop doing things that destroy those life support systems, manage those common resources for the long-term benefit of all of us. And there are a lot of things going on in Pittsburgh that do that, community gardens being one example. And we need to align our laws in harmony with the laws of nature, a system that reflects natural cycles of resource use and recovery and reuse, rather than just extracting and wasting. We have to recognize the value of the services that the earth delivers to us for free. And it is a moral imperative that we listen to the pleas of our children. I'm not going to repeat all these statistics because you've seen them 100 times already today. But our children, this is last Friday on the steps of the city-county building. These kids are amazing, as young as 5 years old, saying, I really love turtles and they're dying from the plastic, to very eloquent 17-year-olds arguing, you know, by the time I'm old enough to have a difference, it'll be too late. And it's not fair for you to put the burden on me at age 11. We have to be grown-ups to these kids. We have only the political will to act standing in the way. We have 73% of Americans want action on climate change. The new study that came out from Yale just this week increased that number a bit. And we have all the technology necessary to make the solutions happen. And every person can act. And if you make a commitment to take action yourself, it does make a difference. This is Rachel Carson's conservation pledge that she wrote when she was 20 years old as a college freshman. I pledge myself to preserve and protect America's fertile soils, her mighty forests and rivers, her wildlife and minerals, for on these her greatness was established and her strength depends. So her commitment to the conservation and preservation of life led to the things that allowed us to prevent the bald eagle from going extinct. And there is no question in my mind that one person can make a difference. Rachel Carson is one of those people who made a difference. Every one of us can make a difference. We all have a sphere of influence. How many of you know at least 5 people? Know at least 5 people? 5? Yeah, okay. You can talk to those 5 people today and get them to get involved. Everybody can do something, and we can't sit around and wait for somebody else to do it. There's no somebody else, people. There's just us, okay? We have to do this. And how? I think the most powerful force for having people act and move in a time when it's really scary and people get depressed and feel like it's hopeless is that we have to connect back to the natural world and take courage to defend and protect that living earth that we depend on. We are more alike in our humanity than we're different in religion and politics and culture or gender or race. We are a common people with a common destiny. If you remember that, and that all other living things are supporting our existence too, then we will not have any hesitation to take action. You have to go to the places that are uncomfortable, and that means you call up your local government representative, you call up your mayor, you call up your senator and your representative at both the state and the federal level, you call the governor and you write to the president, even though he's hopeless at this point. You need to make your voice heard and be a pain in the neck about it. I make my students do this for their first assignment. Who represents you? How many of you know who your representatives are? All of them. You need to look them up. Okay, that's your job. At the end of this day, look up all the people who purport to represent you. Find out where they stand on these issues. And if you don't agree with them, you've got to tell them. They all have feedback forms of some sort or another. Call them on the phone, send a contact database. You have to let them know that we're watching and that what they say matters. Because if we don't do that, we are not taking our responsibilities as citizens seriously. So, I asked you how many of you can sing. I think one of the ways we can get inspired to do things is to think about how beautiful our country really is and how important it is for us to save it. So, I'm going to ask you all to sing, okay? You know this song? This is America the Beautiful, and this is it. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed her grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. So we have to listen to our children. They're taking legal action on behalf of defending our living earth, our planet. There are 400 climate suits going on across this country, and the Constitution of our country vests the power in the people. We, the people, we have the power to save our world. Thank you so much.